started to get this reputation of being extremely ambitious and extremely confident, and people just eventually just left me alone and to get on with it, waiting for me to fail. And of course, the failing never came. It's a bit like a Google algorithm. Whatever we pay attention to, it gives us more of that. So if we're paying attention to debt, we get more of that. If we pay attention to fear, we get more of that. But also, when we pay attention to what we're allowing into our heads, we just get more of the same. Make decisions that are in your best interest, because then you can lead by example. But if you're making decisions that are in everybody else's best interests but are not good for you, you'll end up in the quicksand.
Today's guest is Trevor G. Blake, a serial entrepreneur who sold 3 of his companies for over $300 million. He's the New York Times bestselling author of 3 Simple Steps and Secrets to a Successful Startup, and the creator of the Transformation Experience, an online program to help you achieve success with balance. Trevor's known for his unconventional approach to entrepreneurship and his emphasis on mindset, intuition, and self-awareness as keys to success. I first came across Trevor 2 years ago when I was introduced to his concept of the 5-hour workday, and I immediately went out to buy his books. He's got an amazing backstory and huge real-world experience, so I'm delighted to have him on the show to share his wisdom. If you enjoy what you hear, please like and subscribe. It would mean the world to me and will help this podcast reach as many people as possible. You don't want to miss this. Enjoy. Trevor, welcome to the show. My first question for you, in life, what's the most important thing you've ever had to pitch for?
Oh, a nice easy start then.
Absolutely. We're easing you in gently.
Actually, I suppose it's an easy answer for me, because the one that sticks out in my mind the most, and so typically I think they're the ones. I mean, I agree with the title of your show, Life's a Pitch. We're pitching all the time to our family, our friends, our loved ones at work, wherever. But the one that sticks out for me was probably the earliest when I was aware that I was actually pitching, and that was when I was about 16. And at the time, I grew up in North Wales in a sort of ramshackle existence. My father had been unemployed my whole teenage years. My mother was dying of cancer. We were actually at least 2 years in arrears on our rent. The rent was £11 a month. And we were 2 years in arrears. And I think that the only reason we weren't evicted is that the people who owned the farm liked my mum, knew she had cancer, and couldn't really face the prospect of kicking someone out who had cancer. So, I lived in my school uniform. I had 2 shirts, 2 pairs of underpants, 1 pair of socks, odd matching shoes. So that was kind of where I started from before I had my first pitch. And at 16, I was called into the careers counsellor office, and it was a lady, and she saw my appearance, she looked into my background, and so she determined that my life trajectory is going to be this. And so she gave me an application for an apprentice manager at a chicken packing factory down the road. Unbeknownst to her, and I told her this, and then she laughed out loud, I had bigger ambitions than that. So I wanted to be an officer in the Royal Navy, and she just laughed, because no one from that background, no one with my kind of roots was allowed into those elite academies in those days. And her laughing at me did me the best favor ever, because it made me mad and determined to prove her wrong. And so that was my first pitch to her, but it was sort of private behind a closed door. Next thing I know, the whole school knows about it, so it wasn't so private after all. And then all my friends are laughing at me, and they're saluting me in the corridor and doing all that kind of crazy stuff, And then one day I was in a French class with 39 other kids. These were big classes. It was a comprehensive school. And everybody knew, and everyone stood up and saluted me as I came through the door, and even the teacher was laughing at me, and it made me mad. And I told my parents, and they didn't laugh at me, which was nice, but I saw the lack of faith in their eyes, if you like. But my mother helped me along, and so I went with my mother to the recruitment office, and I pitched to a petty officer in the recruitment office. And he said to my mum, he didn't look at me, I was invisible to him. He looked at my mum in the eyes and he said, people like you don't go into this world. It's a very special world. You're not good enough. And he looked her up and down and kind of dismissed her because she was dying of cancer and she looked tiny in this huge coat. She was like wearing a sack. That made me even madder. So she demanded an application form, filled it in, and somehow I got called up for interviews. And so the pitch continues. This is why it sticks in my mind, because the pitch was so many stakeholders. And I had to pitch in different ways to everybody, and maintain my my cool, if you like, when everyone's laughing at you and everyone's sort of dismissing you. And I found myself down in Portsmouth, having never been away from home before. So North Wales to Portsmouth via a number of trains, and in the Admiralty building. And then I had to pitch people who looked immaculate. They looked 10 foot tall. They're in these amazing uniforms. They've got, the what we call the spaghetti across the chest, all these medals and stuff like that. And I'm pitching again, and I'm pitching that I'm worthy to get there. And then I'm given exercises to do, like put these pieces of wood together and get your team across the swimming pool full, pretend it's full of sharks. And I'm pitching again and pitching again, and in the end, you become really confident as a kind of bullshit pitcher. And so I got in. I somehow got in. I got a reserved place, and they paid for my schooling. And then 2 years later, I joined the Royal Navy, and I became an officer. But I never forgot it, because I realized that I pitched basically for a year between all of those stakeholders in order to get in. I never stopped pitching, and I realized that the pitching is sort of fake it till you make it type of thing, and that stayed with me throughout my career. So when I was working in a hospital, I faked that I knew what I was doing. When I was a sales rep, I pretended I knew what I was doing, and as a sales manager, pretended I know how to manage. And as an entrepreneur now, as a sort of a band of one type of entrepreneur, I'm faking it all the time. And I realized when you fake it, if you pitch well and you fake that role, eventually you become it. And that's kind of the story of my life, really.
It's really interesting, that idea of kind of railing against and finding motivation in other people saying it's not possible, or putting you down. And I think I've had instances of that in my life where people have said, you'll never be an actor, or you're not capable of doing this. I remember one teacher telling me in my exams that I needed a 7 out of 7 to be able to progress to the next stage, and he said you'll only ever get a 5. And it was like, at that point I knew I was getting a 7, because there was no kind of other option. In terms of making that imaginative leap to that future self, if you like, what were you doing to protect yourself from all of the noise from the other kids taking the piss out of you, and the people in shiny uniforms saying, I don't think this is for you?
So at the time, because this happened when I was 16, but from the age of about 13, I was a target for bullying in the school. Like a lot of people are targets for whatever reason. Mine was, strangely enough, because I was English, and this was Wales at a time when the English were really unpopular because they were buying up holiday homes and prices were going up. The media showed that in all of its sensational glory. They showed them, torching houses and stuff like that. And so that sort of fed into the minds of my peers at school, whereby, oh, he's English, we're burning his houses, therefore, or the houses of the English, therefore he must be rich. His daddy must have bought a house here. They had no idea what my real life was like. And so you start to get bullied. And yeah, and so I hid out in the public library just to get out of the way, really. And while I was there, I started reading biographies, and I loved them. I didn't realize I'd never been exposed to a biography. I didn't realize how powerful they are. And so I just picked them randomly off the shelf, and I found these people through history who had much more adverse circumstances than I thought I had at the time. So that helped to take the stress off my shoulders. But they all had this way of coping with the adversity. They seemed to have like a secret blanket around them that made them impervious to insult, impervious to cruelty, and even torture. And I thought that was amazing. And so I just started to kind of think. I learned from the biography. I was young enough to be naive enough to say, well, if it works for these people, it must work for me. And so I started to do the things that as I read in the biographies. It was consistent through them all, these sort of behaviors. And so I used to imagine as I'm walking, so I'd stop walking the way to go to the school bus. I'd take a different route, so that on that route I could be on my own, and I could play in my head the things I read in the biographies. And one of the things I picked up was that this thing I now talk about, which is I call the bell jar technique, and a lot of self-help people use this technique. And basically you imagine this like bulletproof glass bell jar coming down from the sky and completely covering you, and it makes you impervious to the negative energy of other people. Well, it wasn't called the bell jar technique back in 1800 or 1900, whichever the biography was, but that's what they were doing. And then I read a self-help book in the library too, by a guy called Jack Black, a Scottish guy who had a great sense of humor, and he called it the bell jar technique. And so I started to walk by myself across the fields and imagine this bell jar covering me, and that enabled me to be to me, it enabled me to keep my confidence high, to be impervious to the insults. But I think to other people watching, it probably made me seem a bit cocky, a bit
Mm.
overconfident. But that didn't matter because I had my bell jar on. And so I started to get this reputation of being extremely ambitious and extremely confident. And people just eventually just left me alone and to get on with it, waiting for me to fail. And of course, the failing never came. So they're probably very disappointed even to today.
Did you have, a kind of band of brothers at that time in your life? Did you have people that did believe in you, or was it? I mean, you said that your mum was very supportive, but were there friends or siblings that kind of thought, yes, you can do this?
No, no, nobody really. And so I learned to keep quiet about this kind of stuff. I was fiercely ambitious, and I don't know where that came from because, as I say, my father was, hardly ever employed in my whole life. Um, my mother was by far the biggest crutch that I could lean on. And I didn't understand why at the time, but she believed in me in a way that I didn't really have a right to deserve. And I couldn't quite figure it out. And then later on in life, just before she died, she revealed the secret, if you like, and that was that I had a different biological father, and he was very successful. And so she saw that the way I talked and the way I thought, probably my DNA was more on his side than it was on my family side. And she saw that. And she tried to very carefully and gently nurture that privately, almost privately. We used to have these secret conversations in the closet on the top of the stairs. And I didn't know why. I don't know why at the time, I didn't know why I was privy to this inside feeling of my mother. She would show me newspaper cuttings of this person and he died in a plane crash. His whole family were wiped out in a plane crash. His plane, he was a pilot too. And I remember one time she whispered to me that in this secret place, see, I made the right choice because if I'd gone with him, you'd all be dead now. And I thought, pardon? And then it started to sink in. And then as I got older, I started to put the pieces together. A couple of people gave me hints, a couple of her friends. And then she told me the truth before she died, which I kept secret all the way through to just 2 years ago, when I finally revealed to my siblings. And it didn't go down very well, but I finally revealed the truth. And so she always believed in me because she saw something different than anyone else in the family saw. In school, no, nobody. Everybody laughed. They thought it was the biggest joke ever, because in those days, this is this late 70s, early 80s. Nobody from that background ever got into the elite schools of Dartmouth, Sandhurst, or Cranwell. No one did. And so when it finally happened and I finally got in, the military then made an announcement in the Daily Telegraph. Well, no one from my side of the family would ever be in the Daily Telegraph. Yeah. But there I am in the Daily Telegraph. And then all of a sudden, everyone wants to know me. If they're seeing the Daily Telegraph. Now, suddenly I'm a celebrity and everyone wants to hang out with the cool kid who got into Dartmouth. It was such an early lesson in the fragility of life, really.
Yeah. You talk in Three Simple Steps about that kind of time in your life, and you talk about being in nature quite a lot, and I know that that's one of the things that you really kind of recommend to the people that you work with. How did you discover that power? Was that something that you were always connected with, or is there a moment that sticks in your mind where you kind of think, yeah, this is something I need to do more of?
Well, there's what. Yeah, it's a good question, Dominic. And there's one particular moment that sticks in my mind that might freak out your listeners a little bit, but it was the day an animal spoke to me. Okay. I know. Well, it shocked the hell out of me at the time too. I was only probably 7 or 8, I think, when it happened. So I grew up in Liverpool. So I was born in Liverpool, and it really was. We lived above a shop next to a railway line, and it was very dusty concrete upbringing. And I don't ever remember seeing a tree, to be honest with you. And I must have, but I don't ever remember noticing a tree or grass or anything like that. And then we were evicted, in the back of the van, 3 o'clock in the morning. Let's get out of here. And that's how we ended up in North Wales, escaping the creditors, if you like. And so I slept through most of that. I took my belongings to the back of the van, but I was only a little kid, so 6 or 7 years old, and fell asleep in the van as we drove out to North Wales. So when I woke up, it was bright and sunny, and we're in the countryside, and it was like getting slapped in the face for me. I'd never seen it. There was a forest, the came out forest, and I'd never seen a forest before, of course. We didn't have a TV, so it's not like I'd seen these things on TV. And then there was these massive giant dogs that turned out to be cows. And I'd never seen a cow before. I didn't know what a cow looked like. And it was just mind blowing to me. And what happened was we moved in, and this must have happened in Liverpool, but I didn't notice it. There was no schedule for me. So the only instruction I got first thing in the morning was make sure you're back by 5 o'clock for your tea, for your dinner.
Mhm.
And then the front door opened. Well, that probably happened in Liverpool, but when the front door opened, I'm surrounded by people and cars and trains and steam trains in those days, and a lot of noise, and walking up and down the street with shops and everything, the high street. So I never really paid attention. But here I am again, let out at 9 o'clock in the morning, and there's nothing, there's no one. It was just complete empty space, like Chronicles of Narnia. It was like going through the back of the wardrobe and Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe. And just as far as the eye could see, it was just pastures and hills and stunning, absolutely beautiful animals everywhere. The noise of animals was the first thing I noticed. And I just went and wandered. And I walked through the back of the house up a hill. And I remember, because I'm only little at this time, and when you're walking up and you see the brow of a hill, you don't know what's beyond it. So my mind was going crazy. I'm thinking things like cowboys and Indians or something, or aliens or something. And I walk up there, and as I finally get up to the top and I can see over the brow, there's a herd of cows staring back at me, Ayrshire cows. I'd never seen anything like it in my whole life, and I wasn't scared. And I walked straight through them with that. This is a stupid thing to do. I was just fascinated by it. And then a few things happened, and the farmers used to catch and trap rabbits, and I didn't like that. And I saw how because it was cruel the way they did it. They would find the burrows, and they would put a piece of string, tie a half granny knot in the piece of string, so as a rabbit came out, it would choke to death. Horrible way to do it. And so it happened once, and it really upset me. And so I took on the crusade of snipping all those pieces of string or around the fields all the way around. They knew it was one of the Blake family who was doing it, but they never ever proved who it was.
Sure.
I got interrogated at 7 or 8 years old by the farmers, standing up against their big white Land Rover. And they were looking for a penknife, but I had it in my shoe, and they didn't think to look there. They checked my pockets. And so I played it. So I was doing what I thought was an honourable thing, letting these rabbits go or not get caught. And of course, they're starving, the farmers, but that's okay. And then this is the weird bit. So then one day I'm walking in the same place, and a hare came out. And hares are usually they're big and they run like crazy. And now I know because I've studied them. They're part of Irish folklore, part of many fables. They're supposed to be magical creatures, and I feel that they are because this hare spoke to me. And the hare showed me a picture, and it showed me a picture of me cutting the strings of the burrows. And the hare thanked me for that, and then gave me some information. And I didn't know what to do. I did, because I'm young enough to believe that this is happening, but also old enough to think, have I just gone mad? Is there something in the air that's made me go crazy? And I went home and I told my parents, and they didn't laugh at me. And they didn't say I was crazy or tell me to shut up or don't be silly. It's all in your head. They believed me. And from that point forward, they encouraged it. And then I found out that actually, in their families, in both their family lines, they'd had somebody, a grandmother in one case, a great aunt in another case, who had this talent for communicating with animals and for also, being a little fae, as they call it in the Northeast. And my wife was from the Northeast, and she was fae too, clairaudient, clairvoyant. And so they encouraged it. And so because they didn't make it seem silly, I kept doing it. And so I started to communicate with animals, and then that's how I ended up understanding that the more time we spend in nature, the more we're able to connect through nature to this other realm. And I've kept that going throughout my whole life. In different aspects.
So you moved from Wales to join the Royal Navy. That connection with nature presumably shifts quite dramatically. I mean, okay, you might be out at sea, but there's you're not being able to converse with nature in the same way. And I'm not necessarily meaning having conversations with animals, but just being connected in that way. Did that change your kind of vibration in terms of the way that you were showing up?
No, actually, because I was at that point was so used to the connection and so dependent upon it that I could find it anywhere, and you can, but you have to seek it out. So the Royal Navy Academy is in Dartmouth. It's on the south coast of England. It's stunningly beautiful, up on a hill. The countryside around there is magnificent. So it was very easy for me to keep regular connection going, and you have to. It's like keeping a battery charged. I feel you have to. My intuition is really important to me as a businessman. And so if I stop connecting through nature, my intuition suffers and my decision making goes down the toilet, basically. And the same thing happened. I was able to connect really easily within the academy. At sea, it was much easier because you were surrounded by this absolute ocean of energy, literally. You are, you know, on your ship. My first ship was an assault carrier, assault ship, and HMS Fearless, and so obviously doesn't exist anymore. But it's a big ship, and it's all metal, and it's all mechanics, and it's all weapons, and all the rest of it. But all you have to do is look up, and then you can take your head above the ship. And if you were to fly up to say 30,000 feet and look down, the ship would look so tiny on the ocean that it's nothing. And so I used to do that, and so I had, I had developed the ability to kind of almost, this is going to sound even weirder. I had developed the ability to fly mentally, and so I could look at some birds, and I could fly with the birds. I could look over to the horizon, and I could fly to the horizon and come back. And I've always been able to do that since this first opening of whatever portal it was that hair on for me. And so at sea it was even easier because it's just this, you tap into this huge battery, which is the ocean, and most people, most of my colleagues wouldn't do it, but I came across people all the time who were doing something similar but never talked about it, and then it would come out, would have too much to drink in a port somewhere, and it would come out, and I'd find out that I wasn't alone in this, that a lot of people were drawn to life at sea specifically because that's the only place they ever felt comfortable. That's the only place they felt connected. And when they would go home on leave, they had all these relationship problems and all these difficulties because they felt trapped in the sort of urbanization lifestyle, and they couldn't wait to go back to sea.
It's really interesting. One of my favourite jobs as a director was directing shows on board the QM2 cruise ship. And she used to go transatlantic, and I used to have to go on board to do the tech and dress rehearsals for the show. And one of my favourite things to do was, once you'd kind of got everything done in the evening, was just to go to the back of the ship and just stand on the back of the ship and watch this sea of nothingness. You've got the turbulence that the ship had chopped up behind it, but essentially there was nothing. And then if you really started to key in, you'd find that there wasn't actually nothing, that there were dolphins following the ship, and there were birds in the sky, and that there was a real kind of tranquility and peace there. I still vividly remember those days of being in that space, and how kind of energizing it was. So I can completely understand that.
Well, I had it fairly last year actually. So Jess and I went on a cruise. We decided we should do things that we've not done before, and I've never wanted to go on a cruise because I think I was a little, ego was too big. I used to be in the Navy. Why would I go on a cruise type of thing? But we decided to go on a cruise, and it was one of these pampered cruises. It was absolutely delightful. We're going on bigger, farther afield on the same company next year and the year after. But a storm came in, and even the staff had never been in a storm before, and they were terrified, and they talked about it for 2 days afterwards. I have never been happier than during that storm. And it's funny because Jess sneakily took a picture of me. I don't like having my picture taken, and she sneakily took a picture of me, and I'd see what I get what she means when she shows it to me. She says, "I've never seen anyone look so peaceful and so connected." And so I'm actually in a bedgown, that's like a house coat that was provided for the cabin, and I'm sat on the veranda as this thing doing this and thing, and I've got the biggest smile on my face and just loving it. So it is when you're alone with this power, this energy, whatever it is, it's just a beautiful thing.
So you come out of the Navy and you go into kind of normal life, to be perfectly honest. You're working in hospitals. You're kind of taking on sales roles. What was the impetus to become the entrepreneur that you are today? Because I hope you don't mind me saying this, but 43 in most entrepreneurial stories is a little bit late for starting out. So what kind of made you go, you know what, now's the time?
Well, I always wanted to do it. I mean, I left the Navy because I fell in love, so I'd be clear about that. And then I became a stalker until she ran out of excuses. And then, and then she had no choice but to marry me because I said, I've heard that one before. That's not true. You've got to marry me now. And so we couldn't. We were about we in the health service. She was an oncology nurse. I was a radiotherapy guy, and we couldn't afford the mortgage. We were about to lose the house, basically. And so I decided to become a sales rep because it would double my salary overnight. I didn't think I could sell a rope to a drowning man. It's just not my nature. It's not my style. I'm very intimidated in that sort of world. But I turned out to be really good at it, partly because I didn't know what I was doing. So instead of talking, I should have listened. And that appears to be the secret of sales, right? So I found that out, and so I realized I'm pretty good on this in the business side of things, sales and marketing. But I only know sales and marketing, and I then became a sales manager, got promoted very quickly, went up the ranks, fast track thing. In the Royal Navy, I'd been really intimidated by people of the rank of captain and above. They seemed so confident and so with it, so in tune, you know. And so I took the same kind of mentality into the corporate world, and I was really intimidated by people who were like at managing director level. I never knew what to say to them. They would say hello, Trevor, and I go, I could never sort of say what I couldn't think of anything to say to them. I was so intimidated by them. And then I got this fast track career, and I ended up at the top very, very quickly. And I realized they're all making it up.
Yeah.
Everyone's making it up. No one knows what they're doing.
Everyone's got imposter syndrome. It's absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you'd recognize it in acting. They're brilliant actors. And I thought, wow. And that's when I thought, well, I can be them. And so I started to think about, well, I actually don't like the corporate world particularly. It's a lot of waste. There's a lot of corporate madness, all the meeting mentality and all that, the insanity of meeting rooms and stuff like that. So I thought I'd like to be my own boss. But then I started to look at my life and say, okay, what am I good at? And to be honest, I wasn't very good at anything. Even today, I'm not allowed anywhere near a toolbox. I mean, I'm terrible at DIY and that kind of stuff. So it was really, really eye-opening to me that actually I don't have any skills. I hadn't been in the Navy long enough to pick up anything that could be transferred to the civilian world. I bounced through a hospital, and there was really only the ability to manage a small group of people was what I had learned. And then sales and marketing, anyone can do those things. I know sales marketers don't like to hear me say that because they'd say, well, no, it's skill. Nah, it's not. Anyone can do it. Absolutely anybody. And so it was a bit eye-opening. So that's why I took so long to figure out what it is I'm going to do. And how it came about was I was working with a company, and I fell out with my boss, who was the CEO of that company. We had a blazing row one night, and that's never smart. You're never going to win an argument with the boss. And so we agreed to a 6-month severance. And so as I was walking away from there, I was just hit by this amazing idea. And I thought, I'll do it and I'll prove him wrong. And so that's how it started. And that's one of the bits of advice I try to give to people who would like to become an entrepreneur is instead of trying to figure out what you're good at or what you love to do, because you can end up loving being an entrepreneur, but instead of trying to figure out what you're good at and what you can contribute, find things to fix. And so look around you, and whatever gets under your skin a bit, and you say, okay, I wish someone had a solution to that. And then you find there's no solution, so fix it yourself. You become an entrepreneur by default. And in all the biographies that I read when I was younger, that's exactly what happened to those people. They fix things. And then the next thing they know, they're kind of an entrepreneur. And then history looks back at this brilliant entrepreneur, this fantastic mind, this like Madam C.J. Walker, this lightning rod that disrupted the world. But she just went, all she did was fix something. Her hair had fallen out. She wanted hair tonic. None of them worked. She made her own hair tonic in the kitchen. It worked. And she sold it door to door and became famous that way. Became America's first female millionaire, which is amazing. And she had everything stacked against her. Born to slaves, a black woman in a white world, a woman in a man's world, all of these things. And yet she became a millionairess. I was really blown away by her story. And so, but she was a fixer, just like Richard Branson is a fixer. He never set out to be an entrepreneur. He got annoyed at how much price gouging the record companies were doing, and students couldn't afford the record. So he decided to fix it. And his life is iconic now, but only because he's actually a fixer.
You said that you weren't a natural salesperson, but you've used one of the skills that many salespeople use on this podcast, which is brilliant storytelling. Is that something that you kind of had to develop, or was that something that was just a natural talent?
No, I think we're all storytellers. I think life is a story, and then within that one overarching story is all these little stories, and I think we're all storytellers. And as an entrepreneur, that's really what I do, is tell stories. I mean, one of my companies is a cancer drug research and development company, and it's very data driven, and everyone's interested. Show me the data, show me the data. Well, instead of showing the data, I tell a story about a patient that did really well on the drug in a clinical trial. And it stops everybody in their tracks, and it reminds them of why we're doing this in the first place. It's not about the data, it's about lives. And so I just think storytelling is it's just a natural thing. I may have developed a little bit of ability to do it when I was younger, because we were often without electricity because we didn't pay the bills. And so the scheme was, my dad's scheme was, that we all literally we all hide behind the sofa, except for my sister, who was 18 months older than me, and she goes and answers the front door. And if there's no adult answering the front door, they can't enter. And this is how we managed to keep electricity on, but it didn't always work, because all they had to do is go into the window and see us come up. As my sister Janet came back into the room, we all stand up from behind the sofa, caught red-handed. And so quite often we were out of electricity, and it was dark. No street lamps or anything in that area. And so we would tell stories. So my mum would start it off, and she'd say, "Okay, I'll start," and then she'd make up a story, and then you didn't know who was going to be picked next. It didn't go round. You couldn't sort of think ahead. And she could point to me and said, "Now carry on." And so I would carry on the story. And they were very funny, because she might start a story about, let's say, a rabbit, okay, or a hare or something. And then I carry on, and I take it into science fiction. And then I pick somebody out after 5 minutes, and they take it into horror or something. And we did that at night time, and it was just wonderful. It was just, they were my favorite nights. I actually look forward to not having electricity, because we actually talked. And in the days when we had a little bit of money and the electricity came on, the TV went on. And as soon as the TV went on, there was no conversation. Just everybody staring at this thing, And I used to go out, so I get up and go and walk in the fields in the dark, and hope we'd get our electricity cut off again, so we can all behave like a family. Because we really only behaved like a family when we were forced to communicate, when we were forced to tell stories.
It's really interesting, that idea of the power of creating and not consuming. So creating your own stories rather than sitting there glued into the TV. And I think, as I look at the clients that I work with, and the people that I know, the most successful ones are normally the ones that are out there in the world creating something, rather than the ones that are sitting there just continually consuming other people's narratives. In terms of that kind of first idea, and it's interesting again that one of the catalysts for that first business was proving this guy wrong. What was the pitch like? How did you start with nothing and build a business?
Well, I got rejected probably 50 times trying to tell the story. So basically, so his name John. So John's company, I called it John's company. He was one of the founders and the CEO, and it was publicly traded. The share price was about $7, but it wasn't. We didn't have much revenue. My job was to bring in revenue to decide, okay, which of these scientific projects are going to make it. And out of, I think there were 14 projects, and I could only find 4 or 5 that would actually bring in revenue, which was a shock to the company. But he took that on the chin, and we did go after those 4 or 5 products. But one of them was very, very small, and it was to treat an incredibly rare disease and there's only about 300 kids in the world that are in this situation. They're born without the enzyme that allows them to convert complex sugar, which is a sugar we put in our mouths, into simple sugar, which is a sugar our body can digest. Such a simple disease, for want of a better word. But some kids, unfortunately, are born without that. And because it's so rare, it's very hard to diagnose. And so what happens is they end up failing to thrive. So they have this terrible watery diarrhea 20 times a day. The mother gets blamed for being a bad mother. I've seen all kinds of horror, or heard all kinds of horror stories about what goes on for the family around this situation. But basically, ultimately, the baby fails to thrive and can die. And the solution was so simple. It was actually a solution. It was a sweet, sticky solution. It's exactly the same sticky solution that's inside candies that are hard candies with a soft center. That soft center is the secret sauce to save these babies' lives. And I knew that, and everyone knew that in the company. But because it was such a very, very small market, the company, they had a solution, but they didn't advertise it. So basically, no one knew it existed. And this really used to really frustrate me. And I came up with plan after plan after plan, marketing plan that I presented to him and others. And because it was me presenting and hadn't come from them, it's never going to make it. This is typical corporate America. If the boss has an idea, that goes out into the world. If someone down the ranks, down the totem pole has an idea, it usually gets crushed. And I know I'm generalizing, but that's what been my experience. And so that's what we had to row about. And eventually I decided to do it myself. So I had this great idea. I'll take the rights for this from that company, from John, and I'll go off and I'll do it this way. And that way I know how to get word out into the world without spending a huge amount of money. But then I needed cash to do that. So I started to talk to investors, having never done that before in my life. And they were all very nice in the way that they said no. They were all very polite. They made me feel really good about getting turned down. I spent 18 months doing this and not figuring out what it was that I was messing around on, messing up on, and then eventually, it's all about. So I was working in. So that's when I really discovered the power of intention setting, because I was chasing money and not letting it come to me, and so I started to imagine what my life will look like and what the company will look like as a successful company, and what I will do when the money's in my hands. Instead of saying I need X, I say, okay, I've got X, this is what I'm going to do. And so I started to change my pitch entirely from, please, Mr. Nice Venture Capitalist, give me some money so I can prove myself. Because they would look at me and say, but you've never been a CEO, you don't have the experience, we'd love to help you, but sorry. And I changed my pitch from, you'd be lucky to be part of this. So I completely changed the role in my head. And then I started to get some success, and one group of investors who I'm still friends with and still in touch with, they really wanted to invest, but they said, we can't because we have these rules and it's too early. Go see this guy. And then that guy said, go see this guy. And that guy, the third guy, only had lunch with me because he'd been asked by this guy. And he said to me later, I came to lunch with you intending to pat you on the head and tell you to go and get another day job. But I was blown away by your passion. And once I felt that passion, I had to make this happen for you. So he became the first investor, very small, about 300,000, but he brought in others, and I eventually raised 2.1 million. And then I was ready to go and never looked back, basically. I mean, 6 years later, I sold that company for 105.5 million. So it's a lovely success story. I can't claim any skill in that. I just did what needed to be done, basically. I became a conduit for doing the right. My mother always used to say, do the right thing no matter how much it costs you, do the right thing. And this was the right thing. Saving babies' lives is the right thing to do. And there's always going to be a solution. And I found that people, once they understood the mission of this, and that it wasn't about making the money, and it wasn't about Trevor Blake being a brilliant entrepreneur and anything like that, it was about saving babies' lives, then it basically made itself. The company made itself. People said, yeah, we can do that. We know who can do this for you. And it became, it was such a pleasure to build that company. It was such a joy.
In those early days, you hear the classic kind of entrepreneur stories of people sleeping on the couch or, in the boot of the car or whatever it might be. Like, how did you make ends meet? Because, lots of people are scared of making that first leap into entrepreneurhood because you take away the safety net. The salary doesn't land in your bank every week. So, how did you survive those early months and weeks?
I did it by theoretically working 2 days a week for a biotech company. My job was to in-license promising development ideas, but in reality, the guy that hired me to do that. So how this worked out was, it's like everything. I'm holding the dream in my head. I'm playing my little movie in my head of success, but the money's running out pretty quickly. We sold our house. The equity we made disappeared in probably about 6 months, and I'm starting to panic. And you can't help it. You can't avoid, that churning in your stomach that says, "Geez, I could be homeless here at this rate." And then, of course, but you have to keep the vision. And so I
It's that
kept the
bell
vision.
jar again, isn't it? You know, that's
Yeah,
really.
you've got to keep the vision of it already being successful,
Mm.
even though it seems to be falling apart around you. And and then suddenly the phone went in the house, and it's this guy I'd never met before. He's to this day can't remember how he got my number or who said, call this guy. He's in Seattle and I'm in Florida, and he said, "We've got a job. I hear you're on the market, and we've got a job for you." And I said, "Oh, his name's Paul. So thank you, Paul. Really appreciate it. Thanks for thinking of me. But I'm starting my own company." And he said, "Oh, that's not an issue." He said, "Send me the business plan." So I hadn't written a business plan yet. So I did a business plan in about 2 hours. Sent him the business plan. Called back, and he says, "Well, I've got a solution for you, but you're going to have to move here." And I kind of laughed. I'm not moving from Florida to Seattle. Florida's beautiful, sunny weather. I'm on the water, living the dream. And Seattle, I heard it rains every day. It doesn't, but that's what I've heard. And but I went up anyway. So I got on a plane, went to Seattle, sat down with him, really liked him, liked the vision that they had. And he said, "Look, work for me for a few days a week, and you can use the office for your business. So you can build your business here, but do this job for me because I don't have anybody." And what I realized he really wanted was he was surrounded by scientists that didn't have business experience. What he wanted was a more mature executive team. And so I became part of his executive team with no job to do. Basically, I was given the title of vice president of commercial development. They didn't have anything in the clinic yet. There's nothing to commercialize. And so I saw through the plan, and I thought, it's smart. I thought, yeah, this guy's, Paul's he is a really, really smart guy, oncologist and a lawyer in the same brain. And so we moved up to Seattle. My wife never hesitated. She just said, "When are we going?" So now. So off we went to Seattle. And it turned out that I didn't have a job. And I don't work well in the corporate environment. So I would come into work about 8:30 in the morning with a little box of sandwiches, and I'd eaten my sandwiches by 9:15, and was ready to go home again because I had nothing to do. And so I admitted this to Paul. I said, "Paul, I'm bored. I've got nothing to do, and I feel like I'm stealing your money here." And he said, "No, you're really making a difference because you're bringing in something we don't have. It's the energy." He was talking about energy without saying energy. So I just did that, and so I sort of moonlighted. I ended up cutting it down to 2 days a week, which really was 4 hours a week because I'd work 2 hours in the morning and then build Qual Medical in the same space. I could use all the equipment, all the office equipment. So it was a really fantastic solution. And I know the reason you're asking that question is it can be terrifying to make a jump and then say, "Okay, now I'm an entrepreneur, but I don't know where the money's going to come from." And I don't recommend that to anybody because it's too much stress. And you want to focus on the vision of success. You don't want to be focusing on how am I going to pay the bills. And so I recommend that people find a way to finance themselves for at least 2 years, whatever that. You're going to eat minimum. You're not going to go out to a restaurant every night like you may have done before. You probably won't, take a holiday that year or anything like that. But you can cut the cloth to those means quite easily. We all, in the West in particular, we don't need half the things that we consume anyway, and so you can cut the cloth quite easily. Sell your house, go lease instead. Use the equity, whatever it may be. Make sure you've got this little cushion, because the opportunity to get big fast today is one that is a fantastic opportunity. When I first started, companies, the average age of a company was about 70 years, 70 years. Now it's down to 15. So we live in a world where get big fast is pretty much the business model. And to do that, you really need to survive 2 years. So make sure you've got enough capital or a part-time job where you can say, "Okay, for 2 years, we're going to be really frugal, but it'll be worth it." And that takes all the stress and the pressure away. I would never recommend to anybody to start a company with nothing, because my dad did it 15 times and failed all 15 times.
Yeah. I think it's almost impossible to, because you can't control your mindset, or it's so difficult to control your mindset when you're in that kind of level of scarcity. I think it's interesting that you talk there about keeping that positive vision of what it was like to have the business and to be commercially successful with the business. And I know you talk a lot about your mini mind movie technique and this idea of really emotionally associating with that future vision of success. One of the guests on the podcast recently was Anna Hemmings, who's a 6-time world champion marathon kayaker, and she was talking in a very similar way about that idea of, you know, visualizing herself crossing the finish line and exactly how every stroke felt. Will you talk to me a little bit about, you know, the ingredients that you think go into preparing that mind movie?
So the one of the techniques that I try to teach is window shopping, which is something that sounds very easy, but it actually can be intimidating and difficult to do. So the kayaker, you know, she knows what it's like to sit in the kayak. She knows what it's like to be on the water. She knows what it's like to be exhausted. She knows what it's like to cross the finishing line. So all that's in her head because she's already experienced it. Now what she's doing is projecting being number one. And so she doesn't have to imagine what it's like to be in a kayak or imagine what the cold water feels like that, because she knows that. And so with imagining success in a business setting. So let's say someone who's listening to this is just starting out and says, okay, I'm starting my own company. It's hard to imagine the success of that company just by using your brain. So what you have to do is go on a journey or a crusade of window shopping. So the way to do it is to put yourself in situations where you know you're going to be when you're successful, and use all 5 senses. So you smell it and touch it, taste it. And so I would take myself to places where CEOs gather, and places where top manufacturers gather, and places where the biggest pharmaceutical companies gather and share best practices and show off and do all the things that they do in these crazily expensive meetings. I would just pay my registration fee. I would pretend I was a doctor. No one ever questioned that. So I'd be Dr. Trevor Blake, and I would walk around and everyone would talk to me and say, oh, Dr. Blake, pleased to meet you. Where do you practice? You know, and I would make up a story and everything. But what I was doing is getting the feeling of being in that environment, feeling like I belong. And you never forget it. And so then you add that to the movie. And then I would think, okay, when I'm successful, you know, I'm going to go to a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And so I actually went, you know, I would spend the money, off we went. That's $2,000, I think it cost us. Go to a 3 Michelin star restaurant and get that feeling. And then, you know, for a birthday or something, instead of people buying gifts or something, I would say, put all your money together and get me a $300 bottle of wine. And because that's what I'm going to drink when I'm successful. And so I'd have all of these sensory inputs into my brain. And the reason I was doing that, I learned this from the biographies. And the reason you're doing it is that at the back of in your brainstem here, you have a group of neurons called reticular activation system. And only us and reptiles have them. And they keep us in a loop. It's a bit like a Google algorithm. Whatever we pay attention to, it gives us more of that. So if we're paying attention to debt, we get more of that. If we pay attention to fear, we get more of that. But also, you know, when we pay attention to what we're allowing into our heads, we just get more of the same. A clear example of how it works would be, you know, your best friend has just bought a car that you've never even heard of, a make that you've never even heard of, and is so excited, you go along to see it, and then the next day you see the same car, the same colour everywhere. It's like they drop down in parachutes at night, you know, and so that's just because your reticular activation system is filtering out everything that it thinks is unimportant to you. So when you take yourself to the places you will go when you're successful, your reticular activation system takes over and does all the work for you. And it makes, I know it sounds very woo-woo, but it makes things happen that propel you more, you know, quickly towards that lifestyle. And then when you get to that lifestyle, you're not intimidated by it. You almost accept it. You're expecting it, and
it's really fascinating because there's that kind of sensory experience has so many parallels with the process that we're familiar to lots of actors in terms of creating the character. And so we used to do these things called character object exercises, and it was part of preparing to play the role. And so rather than work on the script, you would in the rehearsal room, you would bring together all of the things that you needed to create a little scene that was you know, related to the play, but nothing that was in the play or the movie. And you would spend time, you know, an hour in the life of the character being watched by everyone else. But if the character was drinking wine, then you'd be sitting there drinking wine. If you needed to have a cashmere jumper on, then you'd wear the cashmere, and it just completely transformed the way that you felt, and then made it so much easier to step into that character's shoes. And I think there are wonderful parallels there between you know, art and life.
You used the phrase, the same phrase that I use to teach people how to do the mini mind movie. It's a day in the life of your future self. It's a day in your life. And once you experience the day in the life and it's in the brain, then I agree with you. You become sort of transformed. And every now and again, I have to look in the mirror and remind myself, oh, actually, I'm not yet a billionaire. I've been practicing being a billionaire, but I'm not quite there yet. So I do have to actually do some work. And, because I find myself, I'm a bit of a lazy guy. I find it much easier to live in my head than live in the real world.
Talking about that kind of the moment of payout and being the billionaire, you've obviously sold companies for hundreds of millions, and there must be, with that kind of level of vision and that level of success, there must be a kind of strange moment when what you've imagined becomes reality. When that happened, when the check arrives or the money's wired into your bank account, did you have that kind of like, oh, I've got nothing to do today, or are you the sort of person that was already onto the next thing?
I've always thought it was important to allow yourself a little time to celebrate, and like you would, like in certain situations, you have to allow yourself time to grieve. My late wife died in 2020, and I allowed myself 6 months to grieve. I know that sounds very strange to a lot of people, because a lot of people say, well, my partner died 10 years ago and I'm still not over it. I'm not saying I'm over it, but I had to take the time out to go through that process. That's essentially it. I think it's the same when what you've dreamt about comes into your life. You've got to celebrate that. And how you celebrate has to be very personal. And so what I found, so in my mini mind movie for my first company, I think my first company is the best story because it's from nothing to something. After that, I could afford to build companies, even though I still bring in investors. So a couple of things to talk about. One is what's important to you. So I imagine celebrating the successful sale of my first company, even as I was starting it. And a lot of people say, okay, what do you do? Buy a private island? Did you go in a private plane? I think, no, I wanted to spend 24 hours in my pajamas. That's how I wanted to celebrate. And I did. And my wife did it with me. We actually were flying to Seattle. We had an apartment up in Seattle. And I didn't know the deal had gone through while I was on the plane, because in those days you couldn't use your phone. And about 2010. And when we landed, I switched my phone on. There's a text and it says, congratulations, deal's gone through. And there's the number, and I was in first class, but I was still standing up in the aisle, and I didn't react to it, and I showed the picture, the text to Lynn, who's behind me, and she went, ah, and everyone went, what's wrong? What's happened? And she just, I said, let's get off the plane, and so we used to rent a car from the airport, and then we went to our apartment in Bellevue, and we got into our pajamas, and we spent 24 hours in pajamas. And we went down below us was a very, very fancy Italian restaurant, and we went to the Italian restaurant in our pajamas and slippers, and no one said a word. No one questioned us. They just won you money, I suppose. No one said a thing. So it was just delightful. So for me, that was how I wanted to celebrate, and I did it, and it felt great. And I allowed myself a little bit of time before deciding, okay, I'm going to go again. I realized I had a formula, a really good business model that hadn't been done before, and it's like a plug and play, and it would have been a crime not to go again and waste that learning, that knowledge. So I went again fairly quickly on the next one. I'm on number 7 now, but on the next company and all the rest of it. But it really is important to let yourself have a moment of celebration, because that also goes into the reciprocal activation system. And the RAS says, oh, my host really likes this feeling, I'm going to get it for him more often. So that's the thing. The other thing I want to talk about is numbers. So people get very uncomfortable talking about money and numbers, because especially us Brits, right? It's crass for us to talk about. And so I've had to learn to get used to talking about money as energy, not as a thing to grab. It's not Hogwarts vault or anything, but money is energy. So we talk in terms of millions and billions. It doesn't mean a thing. As any successful entrepreneur will tell you, if a company sells for $1 billion, you can guarantee one thing: the entrepreneur doesn't get that. Yeah. Okay, because we get diluted as we go. So the average, there's a study that's done every year, and I contribute to it with information about my companies and everything. The Tufts does it. And so the average equity that a founder CEO is left with at exit is under 10%. Right. Because you get diluted all the way around. Even Google, Larry Page and Brin together, they only have 13% of Google. Microsoft, Gates only has, I think Gates has 30-something%, which is huge, but still everyone gets diluted down as you bring investment in, and you have to bring investment in to grow fast. So we talk in terms of billions, but it doesn't mean that I'm sitting here with $1 billion, right? But I can be if my company goes to 10 million or something like that. So I provide that just for a reality check for most entrepreneurs who have sold a company for several hundred million. Very rarely are they sitting on several hundred
700
million.
million, yeah,
And so
absolutely.
you're kind of obliged to go again because you're not sitting on several hundred million.
I think one of the fascinating things about your companies is that you don't have any employees, and I know you refer to this as the kind of hub model. Why do you think that has been so successful to bring in contractors rather than actually, give people a regular paycheck?
Well, for me, it was a personal decision because when I looked at my regular career, I'd spent 75% of my time in a meeting room talking about how to keep employees happy instead of talking about the customer and how to keep the customer happy. And that bothered me always. And I was, I had a good career. I was very good at the bullshit. I could bullshit as good as anybody in those situations. But for my own company, I didn't want that. I didn't want that. The employees really are a pain in the butt. Um, they love startups. So most employees love startups. It's exciting. And then, after about 6 months, when they realize that they might not get paid this month, because cash flow is an issue, cash flow takes a while to figure out in any company. Their personalities change and they become very difficult to work with. And then after a year, typically, and I know I'm generalizing, but it's been the experience of a lot of entrepreneurs I've helped. After a year, they turn around and say, "Look, if I don't get a pay rise, I'm leaving, and I'm taking this know-how with me." And it becomes a threat. And it becomes a very, very toxic environment. I've seen that happen so many times. I didn't want that in my own world. And also, I wanted to focus on growth, not on holding hands of disgruntled employees. So for me, it was a personal decision, and I didn't know if it was going to work. So what I've done in my last employment with John, what I've done is when we were in launch mode, we didn't have enough people or enough things, and so we would find somebody who does that function and bolt them onto us for 6 months. And so my brilliant idea was, why not just bolt them on anyway and they'll become my company. And so what I had to do is change my management style from thinking like a supervisor, which we tend to do in the corporate world where it's hierarchical, and start to think trust peer on peer. So I had to change the way I communicate and the way I think, because these people don't want to be supervised. They're contractors. They know what they're doing. They really don't want you anywhere near them. So their attitude, although they'd never say it, is please get out of the way and let me get on with my job. That's nice for me. I like that because I'm a lazy guy. I love it when people say, please don't bother me. I'll go and lie in a hammock. That's great. And so the hub model does that for you. These people are really good at what they do. They get on with the job. If they don't do a good job, you don't renew the contract. So you don't have to have this, try and help the employee improve type of thing. I've just found it a pleasure to work. And the funny thing was, it becomes very easy as an entrepreneur. You end up with all of this spare time. And so after about 2 years, I took a vacation. I went to England actually for 3 weeks, and my phone didn't work, and I was panicking. And when I got back, it was a family vacation, so I couldn't escape early. And when I got back, I thought, oh, it's got to be chaos, right? The people will be wondering where's he gone, all the fires that need to be put out now. And when I got back and I called the different contractors, nobody had noticed I was missing. No, they hadn't even noticed I'd gone. And it was a real. I said, wow. At first, my ego went, oh, I feel a bit indignant about this. Surely they must have missed me. And then I realized, wow, this thing runs itself. And so the hub model runs itself, and it makes life a pleasure as an entrepreneur because you can just step back. You become more of a conductor of an orchestra. Like a conductor might not be as good at playing any of the instruments that the players are. They're brilliant at playing their instruments, but the conductor can find harmony. And I think in the hub model, my role as an entrepreneur is to find people that work, the contractors and the vendors that will work well together. And that's it. And then once you find them and once you put them together, you can pretty much, go and lie in a hammock for most of the day.
Is there time there building relationship? Because I like that analogy of the conductor in the orchestra, but the conductor has to have a really good relationship with the first violinist, otherwise they can't get that performance out of them.
Yeah, I find it's one of respect. So the vendors, now obviously most of them I've worked with several times through several different companies in different areas, and so now the respect is there. But one thing that I found very important, in a regular company, you take time to praise people. If you hear from a customer, the customer says, "Oh, Dominic was fantastic on customer service. He really helped me out." Then you go and tell that person that the challenge with the vendor thing is that you can forget to do that.
Yeah.
Because they're so good at what they do. So I made sure that every time I got a good news story, that I contacted them and told them and shared them and thanked them for their part in making this happen, even if their part was really quite small. I didn't realize how important that was. And one day I went to visit one of my manufacturers for a very small product that we had, and everyone came to see me. Everyone got off the shop floor, for want of a better word, and came and heard that I was in the building and came to see me. And then I bought them all pizza and we sat around and we talked about the patients that are being helped by this. They were fascinated. But no one does that with the vendors. They just say, oh, here's your contract. This is what we need. Get it to us by Friday. I think it's really important to establish that rapport, which is one of mutual respect. I respect them for what they do and their contribution, and they respect me for seeing them, for truly seeing them for who they are.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Trevor, there's so much more I want to ask you, but I'm conscious of time. So I've got one last question for you. If you were to go back and give that little boy walking up the brow of that hill, encountering those cows, one piece of advice, what would you say?
I think I learned it as I got older that it's so easy to allow other people to force limits on you. So one of my favorite quotes is something I would quote to myself when I was 7, and that is that the true measure of freedom is to be independent of the good opinion of others. Most people would say, okay, protect yourself from people's criticism. Yes, that's a given. But I found as a kid, I would make decisions because I wanted approval, or I wanted to be loved, or I wanted to get more love from my parents, or I wanted approval from my peers at school. And so I'd make decisions that weren't in my best interest, but ones that made them comfortable. And then I learned as I got older that you have to be a little bit more bloody minded than that. And if you want to be successful, so it's to live independent of the good opinion of others. Not easy to do. And it's one of the things I teach in the transformation experience, is that getting the individual mindset back. Make decisions that are in your best interest, because then you can lead by example. But if you're making decisions that are in everybody else's best interests but are not good for you, you'll end up in the quicksand. And that's what I would tell myself.
Amazing advice. Trevor, thank you for joining me on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It will take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalized report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.